I still remember that moment so clearly that sometimes it feels like I'm watching a scene someone secretly spliced into my own life. The second I pushed the door open after a long business trip, the dark house suddenly lit up not to celebrate my birthday, but to deliver a verdict. In the middle of the living room, the wooden table held three things: divorce papers, asset seizure documents, and a tablet playing footage of them quietly moving my belongings out of the house at midnight. Grant invited me to sit as if welcoming a distant guest. My two children stood on either side, phones raised, their forced smiles painful to look at. I signed, no trembling, no questions, and it was my smile unexpectedly calm that startled all three of them. They didn't know. I had heard their entire plan 6 months earlier. I walked out of the living room that day with a composure I didn't even know I was capable of. Slow, steady, my shoulders unmoving, even though my heart throbbed like someone was hammering from inside my chest. But strangely, my footsteps didn't feel like those of someone pushed off a cliff. They felt like the footsteps of someone finally confirming what she had known for a long time. And the moment I closed the door behind me, the broken pieces of memory, the sounds I thought I had abandoned somewhere in all those weary days, came rushing back like water breaking through a dam. I don't remember exactly what I noticed first: the garage door closing too softly on nights Grant claimed he had to check the construction site, or the strange perfume lingering on a shirt he had never worn. But I remember one thing clearly. Everything began with the smart speaker in the kitchen. I used to enjoy the smart home system I installed myself. It let me turn off the lights while kneading dough, play music while cooking breakfast, remind me of appointments without touching my phone. But I never thought a day would come when it would become the witness to a meticulously calculated betrayal. That day, I was standing at the sink, washing a glass with a faded trace of my own lipstick from the night before. The wooden floor beneath my feet was still cold, and the sky outside the window had only just turned pale blue. I was about to turn on the radio like every morning, but instead of the familiar music, the system reported a strange audio signal coming from the downstairs office. "Do you think Hazel suspects anything?" Veronica's voice, warm, rounded, once belonging to a woman I considered a friend. "She won't notice. Hazel always thinks people are as kind as she is," Grant answered. Without a flicker of hesitation, his words hit my ears like metal hitting a cold floor. I remember standing still for a long time. Water from the faucet kept running, each drop hitting the sink as if prolonging the moment I tried to convince myself I misheard. But then the sounds of papers shuffling, a chair dragging, footsteps. All of it told me I hadn't misheard at all. I turned off the water, dried my hands, and walked out of the kitchen. Every step felt light, like I was walking into a stranger's home. Our basement was designed to be soundproof because Grant wanted a private office where he could focus, but since I was the one who set up the system, I knew very well. Some sounds still traveled to the kitchen if the speakers were accidentally cross-connected. And that day they connected by accident. I stood at the top of the wooden stairs, afraid to go down. I just leaned against the railing, tilting my head close enough to hear more clearly. "Her shares still haven't been fully transferred," Veronica said. Cold and quick, like a knife sliding across stone. "Nathan is preparing another set of documents. We just need Hazel to sign the divorce first," Grant replied. "I don't want to wait longer. Once everything is legalized, I'll take over as CFO. She's been getting in my way far too long." I put my hand over my mouth, not to stifle a gasp but to stop myself from laughing a strange kind of laugh. I used to think betrayal was something that happened in other people's families, in evening news stories. I never imagined I'd be standing at my own sink, listening to my husband, plotting to erase my place in the life I built with my entire youth. But what chilled me even more was what came next. "Are you sure? I've been investigated before. One small mistake and we lose everything." Veronica's tone shifted lower, sharper. "You're smarter than they are," Grant reassured her. "No one ever found out about your husband's death, and this time will be the same." My whole body froze. I had heard rumors about Veronica's late husband, a heart attack. Too sudden for a man who ran marathons every month. But since it didn't involve me, I let it fade like countless side stories in the business world. Now it wasn't a side story anymore. It was right under my feet. In my house. In a plot aimed at me. But that still wasn't the worst part. 3 days later, once I had calmed down enough, I used my admin access to the company system to check recent files. I thought I'd find a few suspicious transactions or small details to add to the unfolding picture of betrayal. But what I found? The signature. Lucas Montgomery. And right below it on an internal transfer, Madeline Montgomery. I sat frozen in front of the screen for nearly 3 minutes. My eldest son, the one I taught how to read blueprints, how to recognize poor quality concrete, how to treat workers with respect, had signed off on a suspicious transfer worth nearly $200,000. And Madeline, my daughter with the same brown eyes I had when I was young, had logged materials sent to a project the company never approved. I remember the tightness in my chest, not because of the money, but because of the signatures I had taught them when they were little, so they could sign their first birthday cards for their grandfather. Those same signatures were now on documents draining the company. I wanted to blame them, scream. But as the details sharpened in my mind, I noticed the slight tremor, the tremor Lucas never had when signing paperwork, and the underline beneath Madeline's name was slightly crooked, as if someone was trying to imitate her soft handwriting. They didn't do it themselves, someone forced them, and I didn't need long to know who. From that day on, I saw everything differently. Grant's eyes no longer held the gaze of a partner of decades. They were the eyes of a man watching a threat who might expose his secrets. Madeline's texts became shorter, as if someone was reading over her shoulder. Lucas rarely came home. When he did, his face was taut, like he was checking the fuse of a bomb he was forced to carry. And Veronica. Every time she saw me at the company, she wore a perfect smile, the kind only worn by someone who knows exactly what will happen to the person standing across from her. And that only made me more certain of one thing. They wanted to erase me from everything. The company, the family, the life. Not because I was useless. Not because I was old. Because I was the only one standing between them and the money they could keep draining, or an unexplainable accident Veronica was far too familiar with. I understood what I had to do. They thought I knew nothing. They thought I was still standing by the sink, washing glasses without realizing they had rewritten my life. From the very first nights I discovered the conspiracy inside the house that once felt like the safest place in the world, I began changing the way I stood in my own life. No longer the wife who endured things to avoid making a scene. No longer the mother who kept believing her children would eventually understand. But a woman who observed quietly, remembered carefully, and connected every detail the way someone assembles a delicate clock. Everything unfolded so quietly that even I, looking back, don't know when I became this calm. The first thing I did on the very morning after hearing the conversation in the basement was create an anonymous bank account. I chose a small bank north of Seattle, where the tellers still greeted people with eye contact instead of, "Please enter your username and password." I deposited a modest amount, just enough to know I had something to hold on to if the world collapsed. Years in construction had taught me one thing. Every structure needs an anchor, whether visible or invisible. The woman at the teller counter, older, with deep creases at the corners of her eyes but still bright pupils, handed me a small envelope containing the card. She leaned forward slightly and asked if I wanted to review the documents. I simply smiled and shook my head. Her voice was soft, yet it felt like she could see past my steady expression. "You look like you're about to start something very important," I answered with one slow breath. Because she was right, I was starting the most important thing in my life, even if I didn't want to. When I returned home, I went straight to my office, where I had spent countless nights adjusting designs and planning dozens of projects. The computer was still on from the night before, its screen cold and unmoving. I began creating a shadow backup of the entire company system. No one knew I was the one who had built the cloud architecture when the company first expanded. With admin access everyone had forgotten I still had, I copied every transaction, contract, internal email. Everything was quietly transferred into a separate, anonymous drive, locked with a password only I would understand, a sentence my mother used to say when I was little, one no one in my current family had ever heard. Data streamed across the screen like an underground river, emails from Veronica, payment orders approved by Grant, altered audit reports, suspicious attachments under Lucas's name. Each file clicked open another piece of truth, and with every passing minute, the back of my neck grew colder. Not because I was shocked but because everything aligned with what I had been afraid to admit. When I saw a transfer document rerouting funds from the old neighborhood reconstruction project into an art development fund that Madeline had supposedly approved, I stopped. It wasn't the first red flag, but it was too clear to ignore. I zoomed into the signature, examining each stroke. A slight tremor, uneven lines. Not Madeline's handwriting, I knew, because we had practiced signatures together when she was 16. Someone had forced her to sign, or worse, forged her name. My hand trembled slightly as I set the file down. Something slipped into my chest. Not anger, not fear, but a deep, quiet sorrow, like a thin layer of ash settling over memories of the girl I once taught to tie her hair and choose shoes that wouldn't hurt her feet. That afternoon, I tracked Grant's movements using the Ford he drove every day. I didn't need to hack anything or do anything illegal. I had registered the car insurance the day he bought it, and the GPS was still synced to the family account. The map displayed the stops, leaving me no room for doubt. 8:17 a.m. Left the office. 8:32. Stopped at the Brighton West Hotel. 8:34. Entered the underground parking garage. 8:37 to 11:50. Inactive, the car didn't move at all. It didn't take much imagination to know what he was doing during those 3 hours. I opened the filing cabinet in my office and grabbed the old receipts I kept out of habit, and just as I expected, 3 hotel invoices from the past week matched the exact times and locations the GPS showed. I touched the paper for a long moment. My fingers traced the slanted printed letters, as if touching something that had once been true, once mattered, but was now only a remnant of something long dead. I asked myself, was I hurting more from the betrayal, end quote, or from realizing I had spent years convincing myself that effort would eventually make people kind? That evening, I called the private investigator a former colleague had recommended, a woman named Lila, around 50, with a low, firm voice. I only said 2 sentences. I need someone followed. And she immediately understood what lay behind my tone. Leela didn't ask many questions. She only said, with the kind of woman you're describing, I know where to look. 3 days later, she sent me a set of photos. Veronica standing on a South Side street corner, handing a white envelope to an unfamiliar man. Another shot, taken from far away but clear enough to show a small brown package in his hand before he slipped it into his pocket. The last one, the clearest, showed Veronica inspecting a small glass vial before placing it in her purse. The label below the photo read, Digitalis. I set my hand on the table and held my breath. Digitalis, a toxin that could stop a heart with just a slightly wrong dose. Her late husband's autopsy had once mentioned unexplained cardiac arrest. And now she appeared with that same substance again. I wasn't surprised. Everything was following a chillingly straight line. As if someone had drawn it years ago, and I was only uncovering the markers one by one. One evening, after I finished gathering all the evidence and locking it in the small safe under my bed, Madeline's door opened slightly. She stood in the doorway holding a glass of water. Her eyes red as if she had been crying. Mom, are you still awake? I looked up. She didn't look like my daughter that night. She looked like a small bird with broken feathers, trying to speak without letting anyone hear. I only nodded gently. She walked in and sat beside me. After a few seconds of silence, she asked quietly, her voice trembling like someone standing in a snowstorm. Mom, have you ever felt like you were forced to do something you didn't want to? Just because if you didn't, everything would get worse. I am quote. No question could have been clearer, but I knew if I asked directly, she would recoil, defend herself, or worse, be hurt. So I simply placed my hand over hers. Yes, and it has never been the fault of the person being forced. She bit her lip, tears streaming down her cheeks fast, as if she had waited a long time for someone to say that. I didn't ask her anything else. She didn't say anything more. But when she stood up and turned away, I saw her shoulders lift just slightly, as if, in that moment, she realized she still had somewhere to return to, even if the whole world was spinning under someone else's control. When her door closed, I knew the moment had come. I was no longer standing at a crossroads, no longer torn between silence and protecting myself. From the second I saw the first tear fall on my daughter's cheek, I understood that my plan wasn't only to protect myself, but also, the children I once feared had turned their backs on their mother. I didn't sleep that night, not out of fear but because my mind shifted into a different rhythm, the rhythm of calculation, of timing, of placing each piece carefully so that when the moment came, a single touch would send everything crashing down on its own. It had been years since I felt this clear. Maybe because for most of my marriage, I lived by the instincts of someone holding a family together, fixing corners of the house, reminding people of appointments, cleaning up messes others created. But ever since I heard Veronica's voice through the audio system, ever since I saw the trembling signature on a document my daughter would never sign, another part of me had awakened. The part as still and sharp as a black lake at midnight. The part silent, but certain of what needed to be done. The next morning, I left the house earlier than usual. Grant was in the bathroom. Lucas was still asleep, and Madeline, I heard her door open softly, as if she were afraid someone would know she was awake. I left a note on the kitchen counter, something so familiar I had done it for 30 years, so no one would suspect anything. I'm going to check the North Warehouse, I'll be back by noon. But my destination was the office of Olivia Park. She had been my partner on a complicated construction project 11 years ago. At the time, Olivia's company got dragged into a procedural lawsuit, where the opposing side used every trick possible to force her into bankruptcy. I stood by her not because we were friends, but because I knew what it felt like to be cornered. And I also knew what was more valuable than money. Gratitude that people never forget. Olivia's office was on the 7th floor, with glass walls overlooking Lake Union. When I walked in, she was standing with her back to me, reviewing a thick stack of documents. Her black hair was neatly tied up, and her half-rimmed glasses hung low on her nose the way they always did when she was deep in focus. She turned around when she heard the door. Hazel. Her voice and expression carried a hint of surprise, but not the distant kind, more like someone unexpectedly seeing the one person they never imagined they would need at exactly this moment. I need you, I said directly. No circling around. No hiding. Partly because I had no time, partly because Olivia was smart enough to recognize the seriousness in the way I stood upright, slightly leaning, as if holding up a world that might collapse. She set the folder down and gestured toward the chair across from her. Sit, and tell me, I told her. Not everything. I left out the parts that could trigger danger if they reached the wrong ears. But I told her enough, about Veronica, about the suspicious files, about the company payments, about Lucas and Madeline's signatures, about the nights Grant disappeared without reason. Olivia listened for a very long time. When I finished, she didn't ask, "Are you sure?" or "Do you have proof?" or any of the empty questions people ask when they want to doubt you. She asked only one, "Hazel, how far do you want me to help?" I looked up. As far as making sure that if everything collapses, I still have a way out. And if they plan to hurt me, they won't have time. Olivia gave a thin smile and opened her laptop. I owe you a survival once, time to repay it. Leaving Olivia's office, I headed straight to a parking lot near Fremont, where I arranged to meet Aaron Mills. Though we didn't know each other personally, I had enough information from an old colleague in the prosecutor's office to know Aaron was not someone who bent to big names. He was tall and a bit lean, but his eyes were sharp eyes used to seeing through what people tried to hide. When I introduced myself, he gave a small nod and shook my hand, his grip steady, as if saying, "I'm listening, I want to ask you about someone." I said once we sat at the metal table of the small cafe. "What name?" "Veronica Hart." Those 3 words stopped his hand in mid-stir. "I reviewed her husband's case once," he said slowly. "But it closed too fast, too clean, too convenient." I didn't respond. He set the spoon down and looked straight at me. "You want me to find what the police didn't." "I want the truth," I said. My voice calm but clear enough for him to understand that truth meant my life, not curiosity. Aaron inhaled lightly. "I'll need a few days. And Hazel, be careful. Someone like her doesn't let anyone get in the way." That afternoon, I met with Marcus Hayes after his shift. He used to be a project supervisor, one of the most honest people I had ever worked with. But Grant fired Marcus because he refused to sign a falsified material report. I went to the diner where Marcus worked evenings. He recognized me the moment I walked in. 3 years had passed, but those eyes were unmistakable, the eyes of someone wronged, yet trying not to let bitterness make him worse. "I thought you weren't there anymore," Marcus said as we sat down. "I thought so too," I replied softly. "Until they decided to get rid of me for real." I told Marcus part of the story. No embellishing, no dramatizing. Just enough for him to understand why I had come. Marcus stayed silent for a long time. Then he placed both hands on the table, fists tightening. "Miss Hazel, if you want to overturn what Mr. Grant did to me, I'm willing to help." I nodded my thanks. But Marcus continued. "Not just because of what happened back then. There are still things they haven't covered up. And I know how to find them." It was the first time in days that I felt a thin ray of light slip through the dark walls inside me. 3 allies, 3 people in 3 different positions. 3 perspectives touching the same truth. That night, as I sat alone at the kitchen table under the warm yellow light that no longer felt warm, my phone buzzed non-stop. Olivia's message arrived first. "Hazel, check your email. Veronica is filing to transfer half of Grant's assets to an offshore account in Cayman. It's all been prepared in advance." Right after that, Aaron called. "I sent you the audio. Grant isn't leading anything. He's being controlled. Just like her ex-husband." I opened the voicemail. Grant's voice trembled, fragmented, saying things I had never heard from him. Fear. Then Marcus messaged. "I found the documents they thought they deleted. You need to see this." I set the phone down. All I felt was a warm line spreading down my spine. Not anger, but the unmistakable awareness that the wall they tried to hide behind was cracking, and the people I trusted were standing with me. I left the back parking lot without looking back. The old Honda started with its familiar rough growl, the sound that always irritated Grant when he wanted to pretend he was more successful than necessary. But tonight it was the only thing left on my side. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, as if holding on to a silent promise, whatever waited ahead. I would not let myself fall the way they hoped. The street outside was darker than usual. The maple trees rustled in the night wind, their leaves almost translucent under the streetlights, as if everything around me was watching the moment I walked away from my old life, and no one tried to stop me. I didn't cry. I was surprised by that. Though I should have known tears no longer came for things that had died long before I admitted it. Only when I reached the intersection did I allow my hands to loosen. Partly because the adrenaline from their cold-blooded ambush still lingered, partly because I needed to stay calm enough not to miss a single detail of the plan tonight. A plan I had prepared for months, piece by piece. Everything they thought they had pushed me into was actually already part of my calculations. Just in the opposite direction, I turned onto a narrow street leading to a quiet parking lot near Green Lake. A cold wind carried the scent of wet grass and water. The place was silent, with no cameras and far from any route our family usually took. I turned off the engine and let the sound fade into the dark. I opened my bag and took out a small rectangular document box. A sticky note on top. Written in my handwriting. Read. File set number 2. Check signature. When I lifted the lid, I saw the documents again, the ones with red seals and italic notes under each transfer entry. The ones I had spent nights adjusting every word, every blank space, every legal line capable of making Grant's file worthless with one move in court. I inhaled deeply. The moment I signed in front of them, I had actually signed the swapped copies 2 days earlier. When Nathan held the folder up to the camera. When Grant bent down to sign. When Madeline smiled while recording what she believed was the moment her mother was defeated. None of them knew. They were holding the wrong file, they were signing the voided version, and their signatures had bound them to everything they hadn't read carefully. I set the box on my lap and examined everything once more. Not for certainty, but to steady myself because my choices could not be wrong in even one place. "You did the right thing." Olivia's voice echoed in my memory. The words she said before I left her office the day before. "When they use the law against you, you use the law to stop them." But do it right, not cruel. I closed the box and slipped it into my bag. A long breath left my chest lighter than the tight pressure that had been sitting there for hours. It wasn't that I didn't feel pain watching my daughter film me signing papers that severed 30 years of marriage, but that pain was no longer sharp. It had settled instead into a thin mist around my body, present, but not enough to make me step back. I switched on the interior light. Warm yellow washed over my face in the rearview mirror. A face people once said looked too gentle, hazel. Now steady, quiet, but unbroken. I pulled out my phone, not to check messages from Grant. I knew he was probably in the living room right now, reviewing documents, trying to hide his satisfaction behind the same polite sincerity he always used when he thought he had the upper hand. I opened the home camera app instead. A movement as natural as breathing. The living room appeared on screen. Grant leaning over the table, replaying the footage. Nathan frowning at his phone, likely texting his lawyer. Madeline. She was standing in the corner, holding a glass of water. Her eyes red. My chest drew tight. Not out of pity, out of understanding. She hadn't been fully willing. That detail, small but unmistakable, was one of the many reasons why I could not let my life become fuel for Veronica to burn whoever she wished to handle. I closed the app and let the screen fade to black. As the night deepened, the parking lot grew so quiet I could hear the wind sweep across the lake. I sat for a while longer. Fingers intertwined on the steering wheel. Then finally turned the engine back on. I drove to a small motel on the west side of the city, a place where, out of professional habit, I always kept a backup room when traveling. Room 204, a faded blue door. Inside, the room still carried the scent of old wood and the soft glow of warm yellow lights. No one knew about this place except me, and the aging manager who always handed me the key without ever asking questions. I set my bag down and turned on the bedside lamp. The gentle light warmed the bedspread and the worn wooden floor in a way that felt strangely comforting. I lowered myself into the chair by the window and watched distant streetlights shimmer across the wet pavement. I took out the second document box, opened the lid. The pages lay still and neat, waiting for the moment they would come into the light. I marked a small symbol in the corner of the last page, a sign for Olivia and me to verify tomorrow. Then I closed the box again, quietly, like closing a chapter I knew I would never return to. Behind the curtains, Seattle continued moving forward, oblivious to the fact that in a tiny, weathered motel room, a woman was quietly shifting the fate of 3 people who believed they could erase her with a handful of signatures, and I thought calmly but surely that if they believed today was the day they stripped everything from me, they were gravely mistaken. Seattle's glow faded behind me as the old Honda rolled down the highway. The city slipping out of my life with surprising ease. I didn't need the rearview mirror to know the house that held 3 decades of marriage was now nothing but the emptiness they created. The road ahead stretched like a soft ribbon of fog, and in the cold dawn wind, the Oregon mountains rose like silent green walls along every curve. The quiet was so deep I could hear the crisp crack of pine resin in the wind as I drove through the forest. Amid that stillness, my heartbeat slowed. As if I had finally found ground to anchor myself after months of bracing through blow after blow. The cabin appeared just as the morning light touched the damp earth. The dark wooden roof, the slanted porch, and the sound of the creek behind the hill unchanged from the first time I came here years ago. No cell signal, no voices, no one knew this place existed except me. When the cabin door opened, the smell of old wood mixed with the faint smoke from the fireplace wrapped around me, warm enough that I closed my eyes for a moment just to release the tension. This wasn't a hideout, this was my trench. A car climbed the rocky path outside. The sound didn't startle me, it simply signaled that my first ally had arrived. The door swung open sharply, in the way Olivia always entered when stressed. Her long hair was tied high, her sharp features softened only by the worry in her eyes. "Hazel, you can't just disappear like that," she said, tossing her coat onto a chair. "The whole city is looking for you, especially Grant." I gave a faint smile and poured another cup of tea. Good. People reveal the most when they panic. Olivia sat across from me, placing both hands on the table. "You're scaring me. Grant is looking for you because Veronica is forcing him to sign a life insurance policy worth $2 million. You understand what that means, right?" "I understand," I said, my voice dropping. And I also know Grant thinks he's being clever. But he doesn't see what's waiting to bite him from behind. Olivia stared at me for a long moment. Then exhaled hard. Fine. If you're committed to this, then so am I. The second car arrived slower, as if its driver weighed every foot of road before coming. Aaron Mills stepped in with a thick document bag. His eyes heavy with the weight of secrets he had carried for others, he nodded at Olivia and sat near the fireplace. I brought everything you need, and a few things I'm sure you didn't think of. He laid the papers on the table and opened the first page. Veronica's ex-husband's death report. The amount of digitalis in his blood was nearly 3 times the natural threshold. But the final test results were altered. Exactly 3 days after he died. Number Stan. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows along the walls. I didn't react right away. A coldness spread from the base of my neck down my spine, not fear, but the sensation of every unanswered suspicion falling neatly into place. And the insurance policy you mentioned. Aaron flipped the page. $2 million. Veronica is the secondary beneficiary after you. Once the divorce is finalized, she becomes the only one. Olivia shook her head. She planned every step. She planned so thoroughly that Grant never noticed. I murmured. He thinks he's controlling everything. Aaron studied me carefully. Hazel. You know what this implies. I placed my hand on the documents, feeling the sharp edge press lightly into my skin. A shadow of sorrow passed through me, not for Grant, but for his blindness. Grant is being controlled, I said. Like a pawn too foolish to realize he'll be removed once he's served his purpose. Olivia opened her laptop, revealing the cash flow diagram of 4 shell companies. Red arrows stretched from each one toward a single offshore account in Cayman. All of it funnels to Veronica, she said. Grant signed transaction approvals without realizing he was legitimizing her entire operation. Aaron added. Her previous husband died right after a major increase in his life insurance policy. Grant is doing the same. The pattern is unmistakable. I looked at the 2 people sitting in that small cabin, neither pitying me, both offering the quiet respect only those who have seen darkness can offer. The fire snapped softly. Wind pressed against the glass, making it tremble, as if the forest itself leaned toward the truth. Finally, I spoke slow and clear. I don't have to do anything. If we stay still, they'll destroy each other. Olivia's eyes widened. Aaron leaned back slightly, his brows knitting as he processed it. I continued. Veronica doesn't want to split the assets. She wants everything. And Grant is too arrogant to see he's standing in the exact spot her previous husband stood. The cabin fell silent, not a frightening silence, but the kind that comes with an undeniable truth. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, darkness draped over the mountain slopes, and the distant lake reflected a thin streak of moonlight like a blade of silver. There's only one thing we have to do, I said without turning around. Make sure that when everything collapses, the innocent ones don't get dragged down with them. Olivia rose and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Hazel, if this is the path you choose, I'm walking it with you. So am I, Aaron said, still seated but with a firm tone. And I think you know. The next phase leaves no room for mistakes. I nodded slightly. My hand resting on the cold window frame. In the distance, the Oregon forest rustled in the wind, a dark, familiar kind of music I had grown used to. Seattle was in panic. Grant was lost. Veronica believed she held everything, and I was finally where I needed to be, far enough to observe, close enough to act, and safe enough that no one could touch me again. The Oregon night wind slipped through the window crack, carrying the damp scent of the woods and the whispering sound of pine like endless murmurs. I sat at the wooden table in the center of the cabin. In front of me, 12 thick envelopes, each one containing a fragment of the truth I had painstakingly pieced together over the past 6 months. The warm yellow desk lamp illuminated the final lines I was writing, lines that, once I left this cabin, would no longer be in my hands, yet their power would follow me anywhere. Olivia stood behind me, arms crossed, her eyes lingering on each envelope with the focus of someone who understood exactly how much weight they carried. Hazel, she said softly, if you send all of this tonight, there's no turning back from the storm. No, I answered without looking up. The storm began the moment they placed the divorce papers in front of me. I'm just correcting its direction. One envelope contained the full evidence for the FBI Veronica's embezzlement through 4 shell companies and offshore transfers. Another envelope went to the IRS 2 years of tax evasion that Grant still believed he had hidden. The rest were spread across the architecture board. 3 major contractors, the building permit office, and 2 investigative news networks in Washington. Each place held a piece. When assembled, none of the trio would have any room to deny. I sealed the last envelope just as Aaron's footsteps sounded from the back door. He was on the phone, his voice low but urgent. No. He doesn't know. Leave it as it is until the office signs off. Yes, send it first thing in the morning. He hung up and stepped closer to the table. Everything's ready. The post station in town will take the packages. Before 8 a.m. I already arranged it with the supervisor to make sure no one interferes. Thank you, Aaron. He gave a faint smile and placed another envelope on the table. And this one is the verified copy we're sending separately to Lucas. My hand paused at the sight of my son's name on the paper. Lucas, the boy who once ran around the backyard with a toy airplane, who used to believe every good thing I told him. Now a grown man pulled by Grant into filth I could hardly comprehend. If Lucas reads everything in that envelope, Olivia said quietly, he'll finally have his first real choice in years. I don't want it to hurt him, I said, my chest tightening. Hazel, Aaron replied slowly. Sometimes the truth doesn't break people. It's the lies that do. I sighed. The envelope for Lucas wasn't like the others. There were no agency seals, no accusations, only raw proof. Veronica preparing documents to have Lucas committed to a psychiatric facility under behavioral instability, a move to seize the assets under his name. Grant didn't know, and Lucas knew even less. I set that envelope aside, apart from the 12 others. This one, I said, doesn't go through official channels. Only to Lucas. Olivia nodded. I'll take care of it. By the time the clock neared 10 p.m., the cabin had fallen into stillness. I started clearing the table when the satellite phone on the shelf began to vibrate. Only one person had that number, Madeline, the daughter who had stood beside her brother and father during the ambush, her face cold as she forced a stiff smile while filming me sign each paper they had laid out. But I had never seen malice in her eyes, only fear. And something suffocated beneath it. I picked up the call. Mom. Her voice trembled, barely holding together. Madeline, I said softly. Why are you calling this late? I heard her swallow, then a quick, shaky breath. Mom. I'm sorry. The words came out so fast I thought I misheard. I didn't want to do it. I was scared. Veronica said she'd get me expelled. Said she'd post my old videos online. I was scared. Mom, I sat down beside the fireplace, the warmth making my ears ring. I don't blame you, I said slowly. What made you call now? Because you need to know this. Madeline's voice broke. They're planning to hurt Lucas. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. Tell me exactly what you heard. I heard Veronica and Dad talking this afternoon, she said, half sobbing, half whispering. She said Lucas was in the way. Dad, he didn't object, they said. Clear the path with a psych file. Just like she did with her first husband. Olivia looked at me from across the table, her face pale. Aaron had stopped writing and lifted his head. Mom. Madeline gasped. I know I don't deserve your trust. But please, help Lucas. Don't help Dad. Don't help her. Just help Lucas. Madeline, I said, keeping my voice calm and low. Where are you now? In my room. At home. I locked the door. But Veronica's here. I can hear her heels in the hallway. Then, even quieter, I'm scared. I closed my eyes, a cold fury crawled down my spine. But my voice stayed soft as air. Listen carefully. Open your window, grab your bag, and go to Mrs. Henderson's next door. Tell her you need to stay the night. Don't pack much, don't draw attention. Mom. If she finds out, she won't. I cut her off, and you have to believe that. Madeline took a long, shaky breath, then whispered. Okay. I ended the call and set the phone on the table. The cabin filled again with the sounds of wind and crackling fire, but the air had thickened heavy, like the sky before a storm. Aaron spoke first. Hazel, we have to move faster. If Veronica thinks Lucas is in the way, she'll eliminate him. Olivia finished sharply. Just like the others. I stood, slowly buttoning my coat. No. That won't happen. She'll Olivia asked. What are you going to do? Protect Lucas, I said. He's my son. But Grant will face what he built himself. Aaron frowned. You're not going to save him. I don't save men who walk into the lion's mouth. I save the child who was never allowed to choose. And when the wind outside shifted, I knew what was coming. A storm strong enough to tear down everything they once believed unshakable. Outside the cabin, dawn had not fully broken, but the air carried a strange tension as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I packed the last envelopes into a waterproof bag, locked it, and handed it to Aaron before he left. I'll hit every location on time, he said, pulling his collar high. Hazel. Once this starts, no one will be able to stop it. Good. They've lived too long in the illusion of safety. Olivia stood nearby, clutching her laptop, her gaze steady on me. Whatever happens after today, she said softly, you have to be ready. My reply came calmer than I expected. I've been ready for 6 months. What happened next moved so fast that even I, the one who lit the fuse, could hardly believe its speed. 7:46 a.m. A message from Aaron appeared on the satellite phone. Sent. The storm will hit land in 90 minutes. I stood by the cabin window, quietly watching the fog lift from the lake. In the clear morning air, I could hear my heartbeat steady, almost unnaturally, so as if every final piece had fallen exactly where it needed to be. 8:03 a.m. The second message, FBI at headquarters, just one short line, yet the image in my mind was so vivid it felt like I was standing in the company lobby. The large glass doors swinging open. Black coats flooding inside. Computers being sealed, employees frozen, Grant confused, and Veronica definitely losing the fake calm she always wore. Olivia looked up at me, reading the message in my expression alone. It's time. I poured more tea, my hand steady. Yes, and this is only the opening act. News began to spread like fire hitting dry wind. 10:15 a.m. The banking system simultaneously locked every account under Grant's and Veronica's names. The company accounts were frozen under court order. I could picture Grant's face, hands slamming the keyboard, breathing hard, calling the bank only to hear, I'm sorry, sir, your account is frozen for federal investigation. Part of me once knew Grant as strong, decisive, confident in any boardroom. But imagining him desperate, trembling, didn't hurt me. The only thing that pierced me was Lucas. Half an hour later, my phone buzzed. Aunt Hazel, I decided to cooperate. A message from Lucas, short, but heavy as a confession. I don't want to be dragged into their crimes anymore. I stared at his words for a long time. The little boy who once buried his face in my shoulder when he feared the dark was now facing the hardest choice of his life and choosing the right path on his own. I replied, I believe in you, but the real chaos began when Veronica chose to flee. 11:42 a.m. She abandoned her car in Tacoma, rented an SUV, heading north. She might try to cross the border. I had expected this. Veronica had always been the kind who believed misfortune could never reach her, but I didn't know she'd risk this much. Inside the cabin, Olivia snapped open her laptop, typing rapidly. I'm checking traffic cameras. Damn it, Hazel. She's near Bellingham. If she reaches the border, Aaron will intercept, I said. He prepared long before we sent the files. 12:19 p.m. The third message, caught at Blaine. She resisted. But no escape. Bad news. She's talking. My chest tightened. What was Veronica saying, and who would she try to drag down with her? Before I could ask, the fourth message arrived, a cold blade in text form. She says Grant masterminded the poisoning attempt on Hazel. Olivia shot up from her chair. She's insane. I sat down slowly, as if the weight of the room pressed onto my shoulders. Grant, betrayer, coward, manipulator, had never been ruthless enough to consider killing me. Veronica knew that, and because she knew, she weaponized it. Why would she say that? Olivia whispered. Because she knows once attempted murder is mentioned. I replied, the agencies will detain Grant immediately. She wants more time to run, but saying that is suicidal. No, I said, staring at the cabin window where tree shadows stretched across wet soil. It's just her way of dragging Grant into the abyss with her. If she sinks, he has to sink too. Olivia exhaled sharply. Hazel. She would kill anyone, even Grant. A long, cold silence. Grant was guilty, but he did not deserve to die. The satellite phone chimed again, slicing through the quiet. A message from Aaron. FBI just removed Grant from the house, charged with attempted murder plus 10 financial crimes. Lucas officially cooperating. Everything is turning. Late afternoon, the sun dipped behind the ridge, leaving a streak of violet across the sky. The cabin stood quiet, a witness without words. Madeline texted. Mom, I'm at the counseling center now. I'm safe, I really am. I pressed the phone to my chest and closed my eyes. A long breath escaped me so light I couldn't tell if I was exhaling or finally being freed. Outside, the stream whispered through the dark, sounding like a song I had waited months to hear. Aaron returned to the cabin after nightfall, his coat carrying the cold with it. Hazel, he said, as he sat down. Grant broke down. He cried in the patrol car, kept saying your name. I poured hot water into 3 cups and slid one toward him. What do you want me to say? Nothing, he replied. I just thought. You should know. Olivia tucked her hair behind her ear and murmured. The kids are safe. Grant is facing consequences. Veronica can't escape, but the rest. Hazel, are you okay? I watched the fire flicker, my hands wrapped around a cup slowly warming my palms. In the crackle of burning wood, I heard a truth clearly. Everything had shifted the way it needed to, without me forcing it any further. The morning after the storm of headlines, the Oregon woods were still soaked with night moisture. But inside the small cabin, everything felt different. No more fear of being hunted, no more pounding heart, only the quiet of a woman who finally understood the next chapter of her life would not revolve around betrayal, but around herself. Olivia set a car key on the wooden table, her expression softening. Hazel, are you ready? Your new office is set up. I touched the door handle, the cool wood grounding me, pulling me out of months of hiding. Ready, I said. It's time to return. The drive back to Portland wound through forest roads. The mountain peaks in the distance wore thin veils of mist, while I stared out the window feeling lighter than I had in years. Not because everything was resolved, but because I was no longer standing in danger's shadow. Olivia's office was on the 14th floor of a glass building. When the elevator doors opened, I almost forgot what it felt like to step into a professional space without Grant beside me. A young staff member greeted us and led us to the large conference room where the board was waiting. Olivia set a file on the table and introduced me with a rare note of pride in her voice. This is Hazel Turner starting today. She's our new partner. The eyes turned toward me held no pity. No one mentioned my 3-decade marriage ending in betrayal. No one said Grant's name. They saw me only as someone capable. Something I had been denied in my old home for years. I took my seat in the brown leather chair, feeling as if I had finally stepped into the room I should have belonged to long ago. In the weeks that followed, my life shifted sharply. Every morning when I walked into the office, I felt a quiet, indescribable joy, a joy once buried under bills, paperwork, family meetings, and Grant's endless unreasonable demands. I joined major company projects from redeveloping a riverside neighborhood to redesigning an art school in Seattle. Olivia kept giving me more responsibility, and each time she did, the old Hazel inside me grew stronger. One afternoon, just after I signed off on a big file, Olivia stood in my doorway with a gentle smile. Hazel, you're making the entire company rethink the way they work. You're not just a partner, you're the new standard. I smiled. After so many years of being overlooked, Those words made my eyes sting. But this time, it was because I finally knew I deserved them. While I rebuilt my life piece by piece, Grant's empire collapsed like dominoes. Contractors who once swore loyalty to him switched to work with our new firm, fraud-tainted contracts were revoked, former employees refused to return. Even when the temporary board offered double pay, I didn't feel joy. But there was no regret left in me either. I watched it all the way one watches a decayed building crumble under rain, not because I destroyed it, but because the cracks had always been there. Amid all the fallout, what I thought about most were the kids. Lucas reached out to federal investigators to cooperate, no longer letting himself be used. He met me regularly under the psychological supervision schedule Olivia arranged. He still trembled when speaking of the old life. But the panic in his eyes had faded. One afternoon, Lucas stood in front of my office, hands in his pockets, eyes downcast. "Mom, I didn't think you'd want to see me again." "Why not?" I asked. "Because I stood with them. Because I stayed silent." I stepped closer, resting my hand on his shoulder. "Lucas, what matters isn't that you were silent. What matters is that you finally spoke when it counted." He sniffled, wiping his eyes like he used to as a boy. "I don't want to be like Dad." I hugged him softly, just enough for him to know I had forgiven him long ago. Madeline was different. She had endured more than anyone realized. After I brought her to the counseling center, she clung to my hand the same way she did at 7 years old, terrified of visiting the dentist. One night she said, "Mom, if you want, I'll start over anywhere you need me to." I brushed her hair gently. "Not because I need it, sweetheart, because you need a safe place to begin again." And somehow, like a small miracle, both of them chose to stay near me, not out of obligation, but because they believed I was the only anchor left. One morning, the bank called. "Ma'am, your former house is being auctioned after repossession. Would you like to participate?" It took me a few seconds to understand what I'd just heard. That house, the one I moved into as a young wife, where I raised my kids, where holidays, quiet nights, and even petty arguments filled the walls, was now government property. The auction took place on a Friday morning. I sat in the last row, silently watching. There weren't many bidders. They knew the house was tied to an investigation. When the auctioneer opened the bidding, I raised my paddle without hesitation. Only one other person competed, but they dropped out after the third raise, and then I reclaimed my own home. No more Grant, no more wedding photos, no more arguments behind closed doors. Just me and my 2 children standing beside me. When I turned the key again, the house was silent. Dust coated the shelves, curtains hung loose, the kitchen cold as if it had never been used. I walked slowly, touching the old walls, feeling the fragments of a life I'd left behind. Upstairs, my eyes stopped at the wall behind the bedroom, a small raised spot, about the size of a coin, something I'd never noticed before. I placed my hand on it. It felt hollow. I took a small knife from my pocket and pried at the wood. A panel came loose. Inside was a narrow gap, and inside that gap, a USB drive. Small, black, unmarked. So old it was coated in faint dust. In the living room, I plugged the USB into the laptop Olivia had left me. The screen lit up, one single file. I clicked. Grant's voice filled the air, low, tired, hesitant. "No. I can't do that to her. She's not dead. No. I'm not ready yet." Then another voice, female, cold enough to chill blood. "Grant, just a few drops. She'll sleep. Then her heart will stop. No one will suspect a thing." My hand gripped the table edge. Grant's breathing quickened. I need more time." Veronica's voice. "You've had 3 years." I pressed a hand against my chest, trying to steady my breath. The recording ended with the slam of a door, and Veronica's voice, quiet but chillingly clear. "Hazel should have disappeared that year. You were too weak." The laptop closed with a soft click, like confirmation. Grant hadn't just betrayed me this year. He had planned it. 5 years ago, I sat for a long time before the dark screen, feeling no anger, no pain, just a stillness so deep it was almost pure. Truth sometimes comes late, but when it does, it frees you from every question that's haunted you for years. I laid my hand on the table, as if reaching for the woman I used to be, and smiled a smile that no longer trembled. And if you've stayed here, listening to me until this very last moment, thank you. This story was long, heavy, but I believe every journey has its own light. If something in it touched you, please like, follow, and subscribe to stay with me for the next stories. Where are you watching from? And have you ever uncovered a truth so small it changed your whole life?